Thank you all for joining. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stephen Mayo. I'm the Director of Training for New Tech Group and TechSource Distributor. And today we're going to talk about the fiscal year 2021 televisions from Sony. So jumping right into it, let's talk about what's new, what's different for this year versus previous generations of Sony TVs. The first thing to talk about is XR. This is going to be the new video processor from Sony, and it really is just a complete leap forward in video processing technology, and we'll dive into it a little bit later as to what that really means. But what's important to know is this is so fundamentally different and important that Sony is actually changing their model nomenclature for the first time in a very long time. So traditionally, the premium class of televisions from Sony has been the XBR series. The XBR is being retired in place of XR. So now if you're looking on the TechSource website, or if you're a Sony direct dealer, if you're looking on ExpressNet, if you search for a television, remember to skip the B. They are now XR televisions. So what else is new? We've got a new streaming service on the FY 2021 TVs called Bravia Core. It is fully IMAX enhanced compatible, which means your customers are going to get really the best picture and sound. And again, we'll get into a little more on it a little later as to just how good that picture and sound is. We've got Google TV. We've had Android TV for a while now, but it's been completely reskinned and rebranded as Google TV. And we've got full HDMI 2.1 on all of the models from the X85J and up. That means full 48 gig per second inputs. And on the 8K set, we've got a full 8K input. We have 4K 120 for the gamers out there. Anyone that's been lucky enough to get a PS5 or an Xbox Series X will be able to appreciate 4K 120. We've also got variable refresh rate, auto low latency mode, and of course eARC. That's enhanced audio return channel, which is going to give you Dolby Atmos and wider bandwidth for your audio return. VRR, variable refresh rate, will be coming later this year as a firmware download, and that's going to allow the televisions to recognize when it's been connected to a next-gen gaming system or gaming PC and automatically apply the variable refresh rate to prevent frame tearing and some of the other problems we can see with high frame rate video. And then auto low latency mode, again, it's that same recognition of a gaming system, and it's going to immediately set itself for low HDMI input latency. So for first person shooters and things like that, these are really going to be an outstanding choice. Here's a list of the supported features for the various models. As you can see, we've got at least two 4K 120 inputs for the X85J and up, and that 8K 60 input for the Z9J 8K models. One of the things we talk about a lot with Sony is creator's intent. So creator's intent is the ability or desire to reproduce the video, be it a game, be it a television show streaming or over the air, be it a movie, in precisely the way the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into bringing that TV show, game, or movie to life expect it to be seen and want it to be seen. And as such, we're embracing a number of technologies, Netflix calibrated mode, IMAX enhanced, Dolby Vision. And for the calibrators out there, these are CalMan ready. That means we can connect these to a CalMan device, and essentially they will self-calibrate with a little bit of extra work. And that also translates over to the audio side of the world. We're now supporting Dolby Atmos and DTS:X on all of our models from the X85J and up. And that really is going to give us the best immersive audio codecs available today. And that brings us to talk a little bit about the Master Series. So the Master Series started a number of years ago with an idea. The idea was that Sony already made the industry reference master monitor, the BVMX300. It's a 30-inch RGB OLED, which is the largest OLED that you can buy today, being an RGB OLED. And it is what the vast majority of HDR content is mastered on today. So the Sony engineers wanted to make a consumer television that could come as close as possible to matching the performance level of that BVMX300 master monitor. And to do that, they had to implement the best video processing to do both the processing itself as well as the panel control. They had to use the highest quality components, grade A plus components, what we used to call mil-spec. They pick the very best panels to become master series. So anytime a television is made, the raw panels themselves are tested to see how close to within specification they are. So uniformity and color reproduction, all of those things. And the ones with the tightest tolerances get hand selected to be a master series television. And then they undergo additional factory calibration. There's a pretty neat video that I'll send along that shows what that really is all about. So Dolby Vision is one of the things that is important for the viewing experience. We do support Dolby Vision, as do most of our content providers at this point. And we can see most of the studios, Netflix, Sony Pictures, Amazon, they all support Dolby Vision at this point, and the streaming services carry that through. So Vudu, and again, Amazon and Netflix, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, etc. And then, of course, the experience. So we can get it on UHD Blu-ray players, we can get it even on phones, and of course on receivers and televisions. And you can see on the televisions, really all of the major manufacturers, save one, which, see if you can guess, do support Dolby Vision. So stepping into Netflix calibrated mode, this goes back to the debut of the Master Series. That first model, the Z9D, was really just a remarkable television for its day, and it really set new standards for performance of a consumer television. And as I mentioned, the idea was to try and reproduce as closely as possible a professional master monitor in a consumer television. Well, it seems they did a pretty good job, because they found out that Netflix was actually using Z9Ds as supplementary master monitors. And once this came to Sony's attention, what they ended up doing was collaborating with Netflix, getting Sony's engineers together with Netflix's engineers to find out exactly how they were setting these TVs up. And that is the origin of Netflix calibrated mode. So what that means today is that if you have a customer that is really into creator's intent and seeing these things precisely as it was intended to be seen, when they use the internal Netflix app on a Sony television and they enable Netflix calibrated mode, once they start streaming via Netflix, of course, then the television will automatically apply the precise settings that Netflix used to master that content. So it really is the best way to watch Netflix with a consumer television today. With that, talking about streaming, let's talk a little bit about Bravia Core. So this is new for 2021. This is Sony taking advantage of course, Sony Pictures and their relationships with other content providers to bring high-resolution, IMAX-enhanced content to your customers. And it's using a new technology called PureStream. So one of the constraints we typically have when we talk about streaming quality is the pipeline coming in and really the pipeline leaving the streaming provider. And it tends to be significantly compressed. Well, this new PureStream technology that Bravia Core is using allows us to have up to 80 meg per second for streaming content. To put that into context, a 4K UHD Blu-ray is typically about 80 meg per second. So we're talking about virtually uncompressed content over a streaming service. So one caveat here, out of the box, this is not going to be set for up to 80 meg per second. It's going to be set lower because we want to guarantee a good experience regardless of your customer's download speed. So if your customer has appropriate speed, and for 80 meg per second, we recommend at least 115 down, then you can go into the menu of the TV and set that for 80 meg per second. So really just a great option for somebody that wants to have the convenience of streaming, but the quality of 4K UHD Blu-ray. We're also supporting Next Gen TV, also known as ATSC 3.0. Next Gen TV is a way to get 4K over broadcast. So for those customers that are using antennas, and I count as one of those, then they'll be able to get 4K over the air. Now, this is market specific. Not every market has it implemented today, and not every market's going to have it implemented in the near future. But for the markets that do have it, and Philadelphia, for those of you that may be in my neck of the woods, will have it in the fall of this year. This gives a great option for great signal source and great picture without needing to worry about subscription fees and things of that nature. So let's talk a little bit about the TVs. Before we jump into the individual models, let's talk about some of the underlying technology that they all share. Sony has been making video processors, specifically digital video processors, for well over 20 years now. And they're generally accepted within the industry as being the best at it. And the X1, which debuted, 6 years ago now, was really a pretty significant leap forward in what it could do. It introduced reference libraries for intelligent video processing and things of that nature. We went to the X1 Extreme and then to the X1 Ultimate, which was in our very best TVs for the past 2 years. Now we're moving in to a different direction. We're introducing the XR cognitive intelligence processor. This really is kind of a paradigm shift in how we think about video processing. And that's because it uses cognitive intelligence. There have been decades and decades of research into how human beings see and hear, and not just the visual acuity, but how our brain interprets it and how our brain puts greater emphasis on something versus another. So a good example of that would be the image you see on your screen now, this climber. When you look at that picture, we know that the first things that your brain is going to notice and pay the most attention to are the climber himself, most likely his face. And then we're going to pay attention to his hand grasping the rocks, and then the rocks. What we're not going to pay as much attention to is the out of focus background. So what we're able to do is cross-analyze literally hundreds of thousands of items and look at multiple levels of a frame and figure out what's important and what's less important, and devote more processing power to the more important parts of the frame and the more important objects. So it really is a completely new way of looking at things, and it's really remarkable. So with that XR video processor, we're now able to kind of talk about a slew of technologies, some of which are familiar to you, but they're really taken to the next level with that XR video processor. XR Color, which is essentially triluminous, which we've talked about. XR Clarity, which was X Motion Clarity previously. XR Contrast, and of course, the XR Super Resolution. So we'll talk about those. We're not going to talk a ton about the sound, and we'll get into why in just a minute. So cross-analyzation, I used that phrase just a couple of slides ago. And what that means is we've got enough horsepower and we've got enough know-how with that cognitive intelligence to not only look at a single frame of video, but look at the layers of a frame of video. So look at the various chrominance layers, look at the luminance layers, and really do hundreds of thousands of equations to figure out how the color is going to be best, how the detail is going to be best, and all of those things. So starting with color, we've talked about triluminous for a long time now. And triluminous, for those of you that may or may not know, is a very similar technology, meaning a physical color expansion technology, to quantum dot. So quantum dot is again a physical layer on the screen itself that expands the available color gamut on a display. Now, when Sony came out with triluminous, quantum dot was an existing technology, but it was really impossible to manufacture without some pretty nasty byproducts. So they went in a slightly different direction, but achieved the same ends. So there are some companies out there that are kind of hanging their hat on quantum dot technology, and that's a technology with triluminous that Sony has had for really several years before anyone else on the market. But XR triluminous takes it to a different level. With a traditional color gamut, when we look at it, we're looking at a single point in luminance. So we're looking at a single point of brightness and how many colors can that display create and display. So that's great, but again, that's not how we see. We see colors better in brighter areas and not so great in darker areas. So we're now doing the color gamut and the color correction and color mapping in 3 dimensions. So we're able to maintain consistent color over several steps of luminance up and down the ladder. XR smoothing, again, a technology we've had for a while, but it just gets improved with the XR processing. And this is for legacy sources. So for example, traditional Blu-ray, that's only an 8-bit source. There was something called deep color, which would allow for 10-bit, but that really wasn't widely implemented. So what we end up with that is when we have a subtle gradation of color or brightness, we can get this false contouring, those steps that you see in the top image. So we take that 8-bit signal and we reinterpolate it in the 14-bit domain, smoothing out that gradation so we end up with a much better and more realistic presentation. So XR upscaling and super resolution. This is what I was talking about that really debuted with that X1 processor, where we're using an object-based super resolution database. Those of you that may or may not know, we have embedded on the chip, and this is a technology we got from Sony Pictures. Embedded on that chip is a very large reference library of images. So it's able to look at all of these thousands and thousands of images after doing an analysis of a frame of video. It looks at that frame and it recognizes objects and defines those objects, and it finds the closest match on its reference library. And it uses that match to enhance the detail and resolution on that object. Then when we did the X1 Extreme, we debuted a second database, and that database was different types of noise. So MPEG artifacts, film grain, things like that. So it was the first processor that could differentiate between an object where we want to enhance the detail and noise where we want to eliminate it. Now with the XR processor, we're actually adding a third database, and that's a texture reproduction database. Texture is very difficult to display. And the way we're able to do this is, you can see it on your screen, that eagle, it's able to recognize it, and it's able to recognize that there are feathers. So it looks at that texture database, it finds another bird, and it looks at the texture of those feathers and applies that to the frame of video that you or your customer are viewing. It's a pretty remarkable thing, and it really gives us just, a more realistic viewing environment. So XR contrast, this is going to come in really 2 different flavors and then a couple variations within. We have XR OLED contrast and XR OLED contrast Pro, which we'll talk about when we get into the OLEDs themselves. And then we have XR contrast booster. So this is for LED lit LCD televisions. All of our LCDs from the 90J and up are full array local area dimming models. And you can see there's XR Contrast Booster 5, 10, and 15. Those numbers are arbitrary. It's just expressing the quality level. So 5 is not as good as 10, is not as good as 15. Now that's not to say 5 is not very, very good. Just within the Sony XR line, it is not the best. So as we step up, we're getting a greater density of LEDs in the backlight system, and we're getting more zones for that presentation, that ability to dim and turn off those zones. XR Motion Clarity, this is based on X Motion Clarity, but again, enhanced by the new cognitive processing. This is to reduce motion blur. Motion blur happens with obviously very fast motion on the screen, but what's important to understand is that there is no blur if you isolate the frames of video and step through them, none of those frames of video will actually have blur. The blur is happening at our eye, because with persistence of vision, we're not able to necessarily keep up with the changing of the frames. And so the frames blur together slightly in our eye, and that is what we perceive as motion blur. So there are a couple different ways to alleviate this. The first and probably least used by professionals like yourselves is motion interpolation. Motion interpolation is simply, we have frame one where the ball is on the left side, frame two where the ball is on the right. The processor is going to make up an in-between frame where the ball is in the middle. It does do a good job of reducing that blur, but it imparts some artifacts that can be unpleasant, what's known as the soap opera effect. Some people find it to be unnatural, perhaps even nauseating, and generally we turn that off. The other way that's a little more popular is what's known as black frame insertion. So we've got frame one with that ball on the left, we've got frame two with the ball on the right, and we're going to insert black frames in between just to give our eye time to keep up. It does a really great job. It eliminates motion blur, but because we're inserting blank frames, it reduces the average picture level. You can imagine that if you've got a bright frame and then 5 dark frames and then a bright frame again, the overall perceived picture brightness is going to be reduced. So XR Motion Clarity takes advantage of that full array local area dimming, and those black frames aren't actually black. It analyzes the first and second frame, shows where the brighter sections are, and actually flashes those zones of the backlight during the black frame insertion process to give us really great motion blur reduction without demonstrably reducing the average picture level. XR sound, these TVs sound great, but honestly, these are premium TVs, and for a premium experience, you want to be selling great audio. Whether it's a big Atmos system with immersive audio, or even just a great pair of speakers to go with the TV, that's giving your customers the best experience, and that's what's recommended. But if for whatever reason in the bedroom or somewhere like that, it's just not an option, these really are some great sounding TVs. Ambient light optimization. So Sony has had light sensors for a long time, and there is some good reason for it. Generally speaking, a television that is bright enough to look great in the middle of the day in a room with a wall of glass that's south facing, well, at the end of the day, when the sun has gone down and they're dimming the lights to watch a movie, that television can be bright enough to be uncomfortable. So what a light sensor is going to do is change the output, change the brightness of the picture so that it's comfortable and appropriate regardless of the environment. There is a caveat here, which is our total peak brightness will be reduced. So some people do just turn that off. But what's new this year on the Master Series is the ability to actually do auto white balance and tone curve. And what that's going to do is in rooms with very bright colors, perhaps we have we have colored LED light bulbs or something of that nature, or very brightly colored walls. The TV is actually able to correct for the perception of the colors from the TV based on the light in the room. So that's a pretty neat technology. And again, that's just in the Master Series at the moment. If you are selling the customer a TV in that bedroom or a situation where they're not able to use great audio with it, we do now have actual ambient room optimization. So that's going to be a process that uses the microphone that's in the remote and is going to really measure the acoustics of the room to a small extent and give that wide sound field, give that best performance. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we have moved on from Android TV mostly and moved to Google TV. So this is Google's new interface. And it's really designed to be a little easier to use, just a better user experience. It's a bit more content focused rather than just app focused. So you can see, for example, if you want to watch Sports Center of Game of Thrones, instead of having to go into HBO Max and then search for Game of Thrones and then finally launch it, you can just launch it right from your home screen. So definitely an improvement there for the people that want to use their smart TV as a smart TV. Another cool aspect of the Google TV interface is the way it interfaces with your Google account. And that means if you're at work, your customers at work, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to watch with the family later that night, now they can look up and say they want to watch Jumanji. Well, they can add it to their watch list right from their phone or their computer. And when they get home that night, it's already there on their watch list on their Sony TV. So really kind of a nice time saver and saves that bickering over looking through different apps and what everyone wants to watch. We also, because it is Google TV, we interface extremely well with the Google Nest Pro suite of products. So for example, you can see we've got that Nest Hello doorbell cam. We can tell our TV to show the front door, and it's going to show what the front door sees if there's somebody there. We can talk to our TV and control it with our Hub Max or our Hub or our Google Home. We can change the temperature on our Nest thermostat by talking to our TV. So all sorts of really interesting things we can do. Now, obviously, as I mentioned with the audio, these are premium products and we want to give a premium experience. And in many cases, that's going to include a high level control and automation system. And that is a great thing to do. And in fact, most control and automation systems have the ability to interface with Google. So we can actually control our automation system through our TV. So that in and of itself is pretty cool. But for the rest of the customers that really aren't interested, maybe they just want to use their cable box remote, and maybe they just don't want to invest in a control and automation solution. Well, the Google Nest Pro suite of products that works perfectly with Sony is a little easier and more consumer friendly way of doing some basic home control. We do, as I mentioned, have the Google Assistant built into the TV, and it is hands-free. But for those customers that are a little more privacy and security focused, it's important to understand that by default, out of the box, that microphone on the TV is turned off. The only way to use it in that case is with the microphone in the remote, which is a push-to-talk microphone. So your TV is not always listening. For the customers that are really just looking for more convenience, looking for the way to talk to their TV and make things happen, you can go into the menu, go into settings and preferences, and then enable Hey Google, and it will allow the microphone to be always on. And importantly, for those that are kind of in between with that privacy focus, an amber LED indicator will light up on the TV whenever that microphone is active. So they'll always know at a glance whether their TV is listening or not. We do, and have for a little while now, have two-way Bluetooth. That means we can pair a nice pair of Bluetooth headphones. There is a way to control the volume independently from the TV, of the TV speakers and the headphones. This is a great solution for a couple where perhaps dad doesn't hear as well as he used to and wants to not have it blaring when mom can hear just fine. So he can wear these Bluetooth headphones. She can put the TV speakers at a reasonable, moderate volume, and everybody's happy and has a great experience. We do have Chromecast built in, obviously, since it's a Google product, but we've also got Apple AirPlay 2 built in. So regardless of your platform, it is very, very easy to put whatever content you want from your PC, Mac, iPhone, or Android phone right up on screen for everyone to enjoy. And not just AirPlay, but finally, we do have Apple TV Plus on our Google TV Sony products. So the customer that wants to have a smart TV, doesn't want that Apple TV as a separate box and need to worry about, you know, switching remotes and things like that, we finally do have that. So really every app that you could possibly want, with one notable exception, we are still waiting on Xfinity, is available on the Google TV platform. So pretty exciting stuff. And though we are obviously Google based, we still play well with others. So if your customer already has invested in Alexa and wants to be able to talk to their TV and show their doorbell with that, we can make that work too. New this year is ambient mode. So this is pretty neat, and it's pretty easy to set up for your customers. Because again, this is all based on Google, they can, in their Google photo album, they can set up folders that are family and pets and friends or their most recent vacation. And they can have the TV linked to that folder and shuffle through, excuse me, as its screensaver. So instead of having a generic screensaver, I mean, the 4K Apple TV has that great moving wallpaper, which I'm a little bit obsessed with, but wouldn't it be cool to be able to show your last vacation or family and friends and not have to put a thumbstick in? So that is one option. If they don't want to link that, another option is there's an app called Living Decor. These are pre-curated images, and there's a clock that they can add to the screen and other sorts of things that is all free and is just another way to kind of have kind of a personalized screensaver. So pretty neat. For those who refuse to have that automation control system, we do still have very nice remotes. These are IR or Bluetooth. Out of the box, they will be Bluetooth. And what is nice about these is the Master Series gets a new metal remote, but both remotes have additional direct access. So now it's not just Netflix. We've got Netflix, YouTube, Disney Plus, and Prime. Now, unfortunately, for those of you that are going to ask this question, no, via IP, RS-232, or IR, we do not yet have discrete commands for those direct access. It is really Bluetooth to the Google TV interface. So with that, let's actually start talking about the individual TVs. Starting off with the Z9J. So this is going to be our premium LED lit LCD display. It is 8K, and 8K can be a bit of a difficult conversation with your customers. You may have a relatively technologically adept customer, and they may comment that, well, there's no 8K content, and they are absolutely right. So one answer may be we can talk about pixels per inch. Obviously, you heard me reference earlier that BVM X300 reference monitor. Well, that's a 30-inch display, and it has the same number of pixels as an 85-inch display 4K. So if we blow up that same number of pixels, we go from 154 pixels per inch, or pixel density, to 52 pixels per inch. So obviously, you're going to have to sit pretty far back to get a similar perceived resolution. By going up to an 8K 85-inch, now we double that density. We go from 52 to 104. So we're going to have greater density. We're going to have greater resolution, and we're going to have closer to that creator's intent. That said, I don't recommend you get into that conversation if you can help it. The reality is, this is the best LED TV we make. It is arguably the best LED TV you can buy. It just happens to be 8K. So that's really how I like to talk about it. And I think overall you'll have greater success with that. So we talked a little bit about this XR contrast booster. It is the density of LEDs. It is the number of zones it can light up or dim. And by having more zones and smaller zones, that eliminates most of what we call haloing, which is when we've got black surrounding a bright spot, that kind of bleed of light into the black. So by having our best backlighting system, these TVs are going to have our best contrast. It is a great sounding TV. If somebody is willing to invest in arguably the best LED TV that they can buy, they probably are going to want that better audio to go with it. But one thing that is cool is center speaker mode. So we debuted this on our Master Series OLED a few years ago. A lot of people, when they unpack one of these and they see speaker binding posts, they assume that it's the ability for a TV to drive a center channel speaker. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're connecting the speaker outputs of our audio video receiver for the center channel into the TV. There are often instances where the customer does want a surround sound experience, but for aesthetic or architectural purposes, perhaps the TV is going above a mantle and there isn't room to put a traditional center channel, or maybe it's on a future automation EAD or mantle mount, or one of those mounts that's actually going to come out and drop in front of the mantle where there literally is nowhere to put a center channel speaker. We can then use the TV as our center channel speaker and have the center channel information coming directly from the screen. It works really, really well. And I'm not going to say it will perform quite as well as a dedicated high performance center channel speaker, but it's a great problem solver and gives a really good experience. Coming back this year is a technology that we've had again for a couple of years now called X wide angle. Generally speaking, when we talk about LCDs, you can either have really great contrast and color, or you can have great off axis. You can't necessarily have both, just talking about LCD technologies. So what we've done is created, again, another physical application to the panel that allows us to maintain our color and contrast even when we get off axis. So we're not dulling our colors, we're not turning our blacks into grays. And for the first time, we're offering an anti-reflection coating. We've been asking Sony engineers about this for a very long time. Customers ask about it. And the response from the engineers has always been that with current technology, there was no way to do an anti-reflective coating without sacrificing performance, without sacrificing image fidelity. So finally, they figured it out. And now, starting on the Z9J, we have this X anti-reflection. And this is going to give us anti-reflection without any sacrifice in ultimate performance. Looking at the industrial design, we've got the aluminum edge stand. Obviously, most of you are going to be hanging these. I think the latest statistic I saw for the CI channel is 93% of the TVs we sell get hung on the wall. But it is just a beautiful industrial design, and that's really carrying through the entire 2021 lineup. Looking at kind of the overall feature set for Z9J, you can see it's available in 75 and 85 inches. It does, of course, have the XR cognitive processor and all of the bells and whistles that we've talked about today, including the light sensor, the color sensor, because it is a Master Series product, Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision, et cetera, et cetera. This is just a cross-reference of what we came from and what we've gone to, but really, if you've listened to me so far, you understand that. So that will take us to our Master Series OLED, the A90J. So I said I would dive into this, and now is when I will do so. So the OLED Contrast Pro is a little different than what we've seen previously. So last year on our Master Series and even on our A8, we had the ability to use our video processor. At the time, it was the X1 Ultimate, to do what we called pixel contrast booster, which means we could precisely control the color and the output at a per pixel level, monitoring how it compared to the pixel next to it. And what that actually meant is phenomenal transitions from black to white, really great color, and an overall brighter presentation. And it worked incredibly well. But now we've kind of taken that to the next level. And the biggest thing is this laminate aluminum sheet that is bonded to the glass itself and acts as a heat sink. OLEDs, as you may know, in the consumer space are WRGB, which means the OLED itself glows white. We put a red filter in front of part of the subpixel, a green filter in part of the other subpixel, and then a blue. But because we're filtering the light, we're decreasing our brightness. So to compensate, they leave an unfiltered subpixel that is just white. And the difficulty with that, which we can overcome somewhat with our video processing, is as we go brighter and brighter, more and more of that white needs to come into play, which is going to dilute our color. And as I said, most of that we can take care of with our color mapping. The other problem is the harder you drive an OLED, the hotter it gets. and the heat is going to reduce overall life of the panel, and it's going to increase your potential for image retention. So by having this laminated aluminum sheet bonded to the glass and drawing that heat away, we're able to have a much better overall brightness and peak brightness with better distributed heat to reduce that potential for reduced lifespan and image retention. That is not to say there is no potential for image retention. We still, if this is put on, ESPN all day, every day, you are going to see the ESPN chair on at the bottom. So warn your customers, it's not crazy easy to get image retention, but think of it like a plasma. That's generally the same rule of thumb that you should follow. But what we're left with is what is probably the brightest OLED that has ever been released on the consumer market. There was an independent review done that did some measurements, and when I do my follow-up email, I'll try and include a link to that review so you can really see just how bright this really is. So again, looking at our kind of overall look of what we have, the A90J is available in 55 and 65, no longer 77. Instead, that's been supplanted by an 83-inch. So now we've really got a big screen experience with the premier OLED on the market. Again, that OLED Contrast Pro with aluminum sheet lamination, light sensor and color sensor, since it is Master Series, 4K 120, everything that we've talked about today. And that brings us to the A80. So this is still a remarkably good OLED display. And this is never something that you have to apologize for, but it isn't the best display you can buy. It's not Master Series. It doesn't have that additional factory calibration. It's not as bright, but it's still a great display. And it does have OLED contrast, which is really very similar to that pixel booster that we saw last year. And it really is going to perform probably at least as well as an A9G in that regard. Similar brightness, similar contrast and color reproduction. So the A9G, as you all may know, was king of TVs. It was the best TV of its generation. And this is going to have very similar performance in that color, but now with the addition of the XR cognitive processor, it's going to be even better. So this is not a TV you need to apologize for. It's just not the best one that we offer. Again, industrial design is really excellent. We've got multiple ways to attach the feet, so we can have it very close to a stand if it should be on there. We can have it elevate the TV a little bit if we want to put a sound bar. So pretty well thought out. And then looking at what it's got, 55 and 65. And now, if you do need a 77, we have it available in the A80J. So XR OLED contrast, XR cognitive processor, all that fun stuff. And moving into LCD displays. Starting with the X95J, the first thing I want to point out is most of you may be scratching your head and saying, wait, I thought it was a 950. For many years, Sony has used 3-digit nomenclature for their XBR TVs here in North America, but in much of the rest of the world, they've used 2-digit. And you may have even noticed, for the sharp-eyed among you, that the boxes, generally for a 950H, for example, was labeled as a 95H. Sony has made it a little easier for all of us and just dropped that 3rd digit on most of the TVs, and now it's an X95J. So the X95J is going to be the best 4K LCD we make. With that, it's going to have XR Contrast Booster 10, so still full array local area dimming, still very, very good contrast, but slightly fewer LEDs and zones than we saw on the Z9J. Still has the X wide angle technology and still has really great industrial design. In fact, I think this may be the best looking TV turned off that we have. Looking at its laundry list, XR Contrast Booster 10 with full array local area dimming. It's got the X wide angle, and in the 2 larger sizes, 75 and 85, we have that X anti-reflection coating. Still XR cognitive processor, still great for gaming, all of those things. X90J, this tends to be the meat and potato of the line. I think the 95 should be kind of where you should start, especially for critical viewing environments, living rooms, master bedrooms. But for kind of secondary or tertiary, now we've got the 90J, which is still great television and has a lot of the same features we've already talked about. It has full array local area dimming. It doesn't have as many zones as the models above it, but it still has zones and it really looks great. One thing you'll notice is notably absent is the X wide angle. So in many instances with many rooms, especially with larger couches or sectionals, it is worth the increase in price to go to the 95 just to get that better off axis viewing. We do have 50, 55, 65, and 75 available here and still have that XR video processor. So from 90J and up, they all have the same XR cognitive processor. So you don't need to try and remember, is this one X1 HDR? Is this one X1 Ultimate? It's all the same processor until we get to really more the entry-level TVs. And what's really exciting for this year with the X90J is going to be the X92J. So this is Sony's second ever 100-inch LED LCD display. We did have a Master Series 100-inch TV previously, and it was remarkable. It was also the price of a mid-level luxury sedan. So if you could afford it, it was great, but it was quite expensive. This TV is about a third of the price of that TV. We're looking at a 100-inch XR-based, full array, local area dimming, Sony TV for about $20,000. And that is pretty awesome. I think we're going to do very, very well on this. I will warn you, this is going to be shipping very soon, but they will be in very short supply. So if you have a customer that wants one, be sure to set the expectation that there may be a wait. You may have wondered why the X90 didn't have an 85. It's a good question. We do have an 85, the X91, but it is not an X90. So this is going to not have the XR processor. This is an X1 HDR processor, which last year was a remarkable processor. We've just eclipsed it with the XR. So still a great TV if somebody wants that large 85-inch TV, but they're on a budget and they just don't want to spend for 95 or an 83A90J. Still supports Dolby Vision, still supports Dolby Atmos, all of those things. It is still a full array local area dimming. So it has that extended dynamic range Pro. Stepping down to the X85J, now we get into kind of the more entry level, tertiary areas, kids room, things like that, where again, budget is potentially an issue. This is again an X1 based TV, but available in quite a few sizes, 43, 50, 55, 65, 75, and 85. We still support 4K 120 on this, so it's a great gaming TV. We still support Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, so it's not a bad TV at all. It's just not going to have the same level of performance as any of the TVs above it, especially not just the processor, but the fact that it's a direct LED, so we don't have that full array local area dimming, which means we're just not going to be able to show nearly the same level of contrast. And then the X80J below that, this is really just the very entry into Sony TVs. Now, any Sony TV is a premium TV, but this is going to be our very entry level. Again, 5 different sizes from 43 through 75, X1 based, still Dolby Vision, still Dolby Atmos, still IP controllable, which if you remember previously, our very entry level was not. So this still, hey, maybe this is a great TV for the garage, something like that. It does actually, this is a misprint. This does not have Google TV. It has Android TV. So it is the older interface. And then I want to finish with this, the SUWL855, which is a bit of a mouthful. This has been around for a little while, and Sony markets it to integrators as a swivel mount. I beg to differ. It does not swivel enough to be of much use to really any customer. It is, however, a really great installation and service mount. So it pulls out far enough that you're able to get to the jack pack, able to connect that Ethernet with a single person, or disconnect that jack pack to troubleshoot again with a single person. But when it's pressed against the wall, it is ultra slim. It is as slim as most fixed wall mounts out there. So a really great option for those situations. And then here you're seeing the line step chart. This will be included in the follow-up email I'll be sending to all of you. So you'll have it at your disposal and be able to see and explain to a customer, okay, as I step up from an X85J to an X90J to an X95J, what am I getting? What, not just from a performance, but from a feature set. So this is pretty handy, and I will be sending that out to you. So that wraps it up for the presentation set of this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording and open it up for questions.